In the Fed! 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 Revolution! In the Fed! In the Fed!
Not that the Occupy Wall Street people are bad, but the point is the establishment wants to co-opt that from the left like the Tea Party from the right. And they want to desperately make it about raising taxes when these international bankers are exempt and offshore. Instead, we're here pointing out the real criminals, the real tyrants that sit in every community, enslaving every man, woman, and child. In the Fed! In the Fed! In the Fed! In the Fed! I want to thank all of you that came out here today. And of course, more folks are obviously going to show up and more over the weekend. And I'm going to go down to Houston and then San Antonio. But the good news is, you know, like a week ago I got angry because I saw this whole thing being co-opted by Michael Moore, calling for an end to free market capitalism and all this. And then I noticed as soon as I announced, why don't we occupy the Fed, that hundreds of groups had already thought the same thing. And that's what's exciting. All over the United States, from Minneapolis, Minnesota, to Boston, Massachusetts, all over the country, people are demonstrating the last 3 days, today, over the weekend, against these private Federal Reserve branch banks. This is exciting. The only way these crooks, these money changers, these fraudsters, these Ponzi scheme operators can continue is if we are ignorant. And the good news is the people are waking up to the magician's trick.
In the Fed! In the Fed! In the Fed!
The Federal Reserve likes to masquerade as federal, but then they got a sign over here saying private property. These are the people that want to destroy private property and consolidate it all to themselves. And if you look at the Occupy Wall Street movement, we've had reporters all over the country. It's incredibly diverse. People that know that the criminal elements in Wall Street have taken over our society and are waging war against the real economy. And the good news is the establishment Republicans have tried to co-opt the Tea Party and they failed. Instead, Rick Perry has to talk like Ron Paul now. So does former Federal Reserve head in Kansas City. Herman Cain has to come out and talk like Ron Paul. So the Republicans weren't able to co-opt the Tea Party. The Tea Party co-opted the Republicans. And the Democrats aren't going to be able to co-opt Occupy Wall Street. The American people are going up against the establishment, and it's a grassroots movement. And the mainstream corporate whore media, the dinosaur media, is losing all of its credibility as the people awaken.
In the Fed! In the Fed! In the Fed! In the Fed!
My friends, an incredible thing has happened. In the last 3 days, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, Osama bin Bernanke, Osama bin Bernanke has come out and said he supports the Occupy Wall Street movement. We've seen the head of the Dallas Federal Reserve, one of the most powerful in the country, come out and say he supports Occupy Wall Street. We've seen Bill Clinton. We've seen George Soros. We've seen Al Gore. We've seen all the people that have gotten rich and powerful off of stealing people's tax money through their corporate fascist system, telling the American people that are hitting the streets and angry at the corruption of Wall Street that they need to sit down and, basically feel good because the government hears you and is with you. This is a desperate attempt for the system to try to co-opt the anger.
In the Fed! 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 Revolution!
Obama came out, as you know, yesterday in a speech and said, "We are in solidarity with you that want to occupy Wall Street," when he's totally bankrolled, just like the Republican Party, by Wall Street. They're doing that because they're desperate. And Obama went on to say, "I wouldn't have done this. I would have gone after the bankers if this was illegal, but it's not. But it's the bankers that took over the government and changed the laws in a bipartisan criminal action to allow the Federal Reserve to create the $1,000+ trillion in derivatives and try to saddle us with it. We're not your slaves."
The Federal Reserve is the 1%. The Federal Reserve is the 1%.
And remember, 10 years ago, there wouldn't be 10 people out here protesting them. It was completely false. foreign and alien to everyone. But now in national polls, between 75 and 85% of Americans want to audit or abolish this criminal organization. That's why they've had all these different Federal Reserve spokespeople come out and say, oh, we support Occupy Wall Street, because they want to keep it nebulous. Oh, the free market. Let us raise your taxes. That'll get the rich guys. When, again, they wrote the laws that are exempt. Obviously, all of you know why we're here. It's to draw media attention to the real parasites, the real criminals, the real warmongers. And it's over. Democrats have now learned that the Democratic Party is a pro-torture, pro-war, pro-Wall Street corruption, crony capitalist, anti-free market garbage. And all they offer is indentured servitude, living on the globalist plantation. And now the Republicans are waking up to the fact that their party's totally controlled and a bunch of bloodthirsty warmongers. That's why all of the mainstream dinosaur media first ignores and then attacks Ron Paul. Because Ron Paul has always stood for the same thing: common sense and the Constitution, and not being a murdering, warmongering nation run by a bunch of criminal, ruthless corporations. Ron Paul! 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 And make no mistake, the YouTube videos you make here today, all combined, will reach tens of millions of people. And make no mistake, all over the United States there are demonstrations and occupations of the private run-for-profit Federal Reserve. The sleeping giant that is the American people is waking up and realizing that America's wealth and power and ingenuity was hijacked in 1913 by a criminal conspiracy of bankers to masquerade as a federal agency, to use the power of the U.S. currency and the people to buy off the world and set up a tyranny. And now the people have awakened to that tyranny, and the beginning of the end of the criminal Federal Reserve has begun!